Let's see. Hopefully this is working. I'll go ahead and make sure that it is. I never hit play. Sorry. Just a second. I'm just going to verify that the audio is working here. All right, it should be. Anyway, we're going to continue with database stuff, but we are going to switch this a little bit because once I cover the last thing that I want to talk about with respect to database design, let's see. Just 1 second here. It's not working. No, it is. Oh, come on in. Probably not. This is computer science too.
Sorry about that.
All right. You're forever on YouTube now. Enjoy it. No, they didn't get in the camera line, so that nobody knows who they are. Anyway, then we're going to start covering Jdbc. Before we do that, though, I just wanted to mention the last time I brought up the idea that this OOP model and this relational model, they aren't exactly the same. Like one was invented 20 years before the other. So there is this discrepancy. In particular, OOP has behavior and methods. You don't have functions inside of a table. You have stored procedures in a database, but it's not a part of the data model itself. You also have inheritance, so you have subclasses and superclasses in the OOP model, and you have polymorphism, but you don't have that in the relational model. So it all comes down to how do we simulate or how do we model or capture the idea of subclasses in our table design. Yeah?
Is there like a newer version, like newer database model?
There are other database models that we haven't talked about and we will not talk about. For example, NoSQL. That's a catch-all term for anything that's non-relational data model. Key value pairs, so like a map, right? That's a non-relational model, and there are databases out there that are just maps, MongoDB or NoSQL stuff, where you have a key and you have a value. You don't have hard and fast relationships between records, or you have loose relations between records that, by convention, this key maps to this value, this value maps refers to this key over here, right? Now everything is a runtime issue instead of an enforced constraint in the database. So basically you are sacrificing those ACID principles. And the idea behind NoSQL is performance for big data. But the number of people who actually need big data probably are far and few between. It does have its niche in, say, text searches. So if you want to archive a whole bunch of articles, NoSQL is very fast as far as keyword searches within all those articles or whatever. It's usually overly hyped. I think the hype has actually gone down. There was a time there when everybody thought NoSQL, and like let's throw out our relational databases entirely, and then realizing that there's no data integrity. Oh crap! What have we gotten ourselves into here? And now the hype is mostly gone. You do have really cool databases like Redis, R-E-D-I-S, not Reddit, but Redis. And that is a direct database persistence kind of thing where if you, in Java, for example, if you create a set or if you create a map or if you create a list, you can persist that directly to the database as that data structure and then pull it out of the database as that data structure with nothing lost. So you can kind of get the same thing with JPA, which is something that we may or may not talk about if you're interested in that. It's an ORM on object relational mapping. I've got a video on it showing you what it is. Basically, it's you can annotate your Java classes and say that this variable in this class is associated with this column in this table, and it takes care of everything for you, right? That means that you have to have an absolutely clean data model between the two, because if you do anything weird or anything different, then it's not a very clean model at all. It's not a very clean mapping, right? But there's stuff like, and one thing that I really like is in Postgres. So you have varchar, you have integer, you have doubles. You also have blobs, which are binary large objects. So you can take an image and save it to the database immediately. That's pretty straightforward. But you also have data models within data models. So you can have a column that's not a varchar, but is a JSON. And what you can do is you can persist a JSON object, like you did in your first phase, to this column, and then you can directly query against that. So if you've got a video game and a publisher within your JSON object, you can query out that through that hierarchy if it's that type of column. You're paying a price for that, of course, but that's pretty damn cool. Right?
So do people actually use these? Or is
Oh
it-
yeah.
Okay, so
I mean, Postgres is very popular. I mean, certainly. I mean, I don't know what the market share of MySQL and all the rest of them are, but I mean, the price is right. That is the de facto free and open source software for database stuff, Postgres. Anyway, to come back to the object versus the relational model, there are several strategies, right? So several strategies. I'm going to mention them all so that you'll understand what they are, but then I'm going to tell you to ignore them and then use one particular strategy because it's the simplest, right? Yeah, you can have what's called a table per class or subclass strategy, in which case each class has its own table, right? So for example, and I do not have a web browser up. I should have had a web browser up. Let's go back to your Lab 5. Remember what you did in Lab 5? You had this payroll system, right? And you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 classes to represent an employee. Well, if you did a table per class strategy, what you would do is you would have 5 tables, one for each one of these classes. This table, the employee table, would have an ID, first name, last name, and title, right? And then you would have another table, say salary employee, with an annual salary in it as well, so that you would not have these 4 columns over here are not repeated in this table over here. And then you would make an association between the two with a foreign key, right? Just like you do have this in this hierarchy. You would then do it for the hourly employee, the temporary employee, and the staff employee. Anything that basically has state in it that the superclass doesn't, you'd separate that out into 5 different tables. Right? So that is one way. Another way is a table per stub class. Right? Every terminal class gets its own table, right, with potentially repeated columns. Right? So what I mean by that is there would be 3 tables in this case. One for salary employee, one for staff, and one for temporary. And then all of the state that you would inherit along that entire hierarchy would be repeated in those 3 tables. Right? And again, you might have a single table up here and then and then associations throughout, etc. But that again is 3 tables. And then the one that I'm going to recommend that you do is a single table inheritance strategy. Right? 1 table to represent all subtypes. Right? For example, and as a consequence of this, some columns will be relevant to some records, right? Others will not be, in which case they will end up being null. Right? To tell the difference, between the types, you use what's called a discriminator column. Right? So, for example, I would have 1 table, 1 employee table. Now, I would have an ID, first name, last name, and title, excuse me. But I would also have an hourly pay rate, an hours worked, and an annual salary. So I would have all 7 of these columns. If this were an hourly employee, one of those columns, annual salary, would be null. If this were a salaried employee, annual salary would not be null, but 2 of the others, hourly pay rate and hours worked, would be null. Right? I would effectively ignore those columns since that data is irrelevant to the subtype. Now, how do you tell if it's an hourly employee or a salaried employee? You would have an 8th column. That column would be, say, a varchar, varchar 1, in which case I would store an H for hourly and an S for salaried. Sound familiar from your project? How do we tell you what type of an asset it is? C, P, S, O, right? Call, put, whatever they are, right? Those are discriminator value columns. That's a discriminator value, right? And you would do the same thing in your database. When you load up your database, you would look at the value of that discriminator column and you'd say, oh, it's an S, so I'll create a stock instance. And I will look at the relevant, only the relevant columns in that record. Yeah?
So what do we do with temporary and staff?
That's a good question. You would have, well, you would have maybe S, T, and then another S, so you can't do that. So the discriminator value could be the full word: salary, employee, staff, temporary. It doesn't have to be just one.
So like all of them are flat now. All the classes are flat now.
Exactly.
The super long column. Super long
Well, I mean, there's one column, but if it's a temporary employee, that column value would be a T, right? Yeah.
So would the value of a record in that column just be like 0 or 1? Or?
Well, if it were binary, yeah, but then you would want a Boolean anyway. But I mean, you've got 3 asset types, right? Probably more like 4, like 5, right? So you like what? Stock, put, call, property, and crypto. So C, P, C, yeah, you can't reuse C, so maybe a full term like call. You could even, if you really wanted to, we haven't covered it, but you can do enumerated types. Right. Yeah.
So for example, for a project, there's like 3 different distinct variables for each type. There's like 3 variables for option, 3 different for stock, 3 different for.
Something like that, yeah.
So we're gonna have a super long row. Is it?
Well, not a row, but you'd have maybe a dozen or so columns, and like 3 of them are relevant for this type, 4 of them are relevant for that type, 2 of them are relevant for that type.
Would that be like inefficient for storage maybe?
No, because I mean, your alternative is to split them out into separate tables, and now you've just shifted the complexity from unused columns to a bunch of foreign keys that you have to join just to create one stock, right? And that's why I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, you can do it, and if you're using something like JPA, it can take care of that extra work for you, but I wouldn't recommend it for this project. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Then let's play around with some actual Java code today. And to do that, we're going to introduce the Java Database Connectivity API. So the goal here is to programmatically connect to your database with Java code and to pull data from the database, process it, and do something with it, display it or whatever, right? And most languages have some support for database connectivity. More generally, there's an ODBC, which is Open Database Connectivity API, which is language agnostic or cross-language support. Jdbc is for Java. I do know that there's PyODBC for Python. Any language is going to have some library to do this. If you've got a language that doesn't connect to a database, nobody's going to use that language, right? So with respect to Java, we use the JDBC, which is built in. It's been built in since Java 2 or something like that. Remember that an API is an application programmer interface. This is a perfect illustration of the dependency inversion principle from the solid principles that I talked about, where we're not going to connect to MySQL and pull out film stars, right? We're not going to program that. We're going to program towards a generic API. Connect to a database. I didn't say MySQL. I didn't say Postgres. I didn't say SQL Server. Connect to a database and pull this data. Now, how do we get on the other side that the database then needs to talk to this thing in the middle called an interface, an API? Well, that's when we bring in what's called a driver. The Postgres or Oracle or a particular company that produces a particular database will publish this driver compliant to the API. All you have to do is take this, drop it in your project, and you're good. You're connecting to MySQL. You want to connect now to Postgres? Take that thing out, throw in a new driver. You didn't have to change a single line of your code. Right? And that's the dependency inversion. You program towards an API. You do not program towards a particular vendor. All right? The vendors then produce a driver, and I'll walk through the process of downloading that. And okay, ignore me for a second. Delete it because whoops. Nope. Ignore. I should have deleted it before I came here. There we go. Yes, I want to delete you. There we go. All right. So the setup here, the JDBC, we're going to only play with 3 objects or 3 interfaces in that API. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of things that API provides. This is enough to get you going. All right. And the demonstration that we're going to do today is I'm going to show you how to set up your project to use JDBC using MySQL. The process is so first of all, the setup. Okay, the setup is that I need to go and download what's called connector J. The connector J is just Java connection that is produced by MySQL, mysql.com here. It's put out by Oracle that owns MySQL. And I'll just go ahead and download the platform independent one. The latest version is 8.0.28. And I'll download the zip file here. Don't sign up for Oracle updates or whatever. Just go ahead and download it. Right? And I'll show you what it looks like here. It was a zip file. And so I opened up the zip file, and there is source there if you want it, but you should be paying attention to that jar file right there. That jar file, you drag and drop it like any other library, and copy the files. Right-click, build path. Oh, here, I'll configure I already added it to the build path. It's there now. But otherwise, you would go add to build path like you would any jar. Okay? So now that that's in there, what we're going to do is we're going to play around with that video game database that we were playing around with for all of our demos so far. I'm going to programmatically connect to my database using Java. I'm going to pull data from publishers, games, and platforms, and then we're going to print it out. You can do whatever. Like processing here is just going to be me printing it out. Okay. There is a step-by-step process each time you want to connect to and use the database. One, it's kind of like opening a file. Right? You open a file, you process the file, you close the file. Right? Here we're going to create a connection to our database. We're going to prepare our query, execute our query, and then we're going to, if we expect results back, we're going to have to process those results. And then we're going to clean up after ourselves and close the resources. Okay? So open up a file, right? Process the file, and close the file. Right? So do not forget to close your resources. Failure to close your resources will mean that database connections are kept open. If database connections are kept open too long, there is a timeout of 5 minutes on the CSE server, but if you open up 30 persistent connections, that's it. It will reject all future connections until they've all timed out. I'll demonstrate this here in a second. Okay. So remember that we've got this video game database. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull data, and I've decided to go ahead and implement these 3 methods right here. Let's go ahead and get a publisher by their ID. Right? Let's go ahead and get a publisher by their name. Right? And let's go ahead and just get a list of all the games so that we can print them all out. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and give myself some more real estate here. How is it looking on the live stream? I'm not cutting. Okay, now I'm not cutting anything off. And oops, nope, zoom in. There we go. Okay. So let's do this one first. First of all, I'm going to need to return something. So let's go ahead and make a publisher P, right? And we'll return P. But of course, we need to get the data associated with that, which of course would be the publisher's name. Given the ID, though, I've already got it. I don't need to pull that from the database. I will use that to query the database. Okay? So, 1, make your connection. To make your connection, what you need is a username, a password, and a URL. So, string URL, and I'll show you what that should look like here in a second. String user, And since I'm connecting to my database, it'll be my CSE login. Right? It'll be your CSE login when you connect to yours. My password is, can you guess? 1234. Right? And this is why I told you do not use a password that you care about. You will be putting this plain text in your Java code. If somebody else sees this, they've got your password. So 1234 is good enough. Although then other people could be connecting to your stuff. I don't have anything in there right now that I care about, so don't worry about it. I never put anything in there that I care about. All right. So let's see. You know what? Sorry, just a second. I need to open up my notes. Just to remind you, because I'm going to have to cut and paste the URL. Where are my notes? Desktop. Notes. There we go. All right. So the URL, if I were connecting to a web server, what would it look like? HTTPS, right? That is a protocol, remember? That is a hypertext transfer protocol under a secure socket layer, right? And then you go to cse.unl.edu. We're not connecting to a web page, though. We are connecting to a JDBC server, or MySQL server, JDBC, using MySQL. Right? That's my protocol right there. What are you connecting to? I'm connecting to my database. So even though I'm using the username right here, it's going to end up being the same thing as the database. And because we can't keep anything simple, we also need this. There. So make sure that you copy that down really quick. Don't worry about that. It'll be pushed to the notes. When you do your lab, when you come back from spring break, it'll be there that you can cut and paste. All that stuff is just configuration stuff that's necessary. I had to troubleshoot for many hours one day, and I have to do it all the time, every time I do this course, because they change stuff, and I have to troubleshoot and make sure that it works and add or remove parameters like this for configuration. Yeah?
Isn't that how you pass parameters
It is.
to the server?
Ampersand, right? Ampersand, right? Yep, that's exactly what, it's just a protocol, it's the same as HTTPS. Those are all, they're all key value pairs. Key, use Unicode, equals true, right? Use JDBC compliant time zone shift, equals true. Use legacy date time code, equals false. Server time code, UTC. All right.
Isn't that like technically a security risk if it's like open?
Technically, we are connecting over 3306, and it is not encrypted. And so your database stuff could be sniffed out by, let's say, Wireshark. Definitely don't do something like that. That's why ultimately security is handled better by networking stuff. That if you have an app that is connecting to a database, they're both sitting behind a firewall. Nobody ever accesses your database directly. They only access the app, right? And then the app speaks to the database behind that firewall, and this stuff is never seen at all. Right? Yeah, go ahead.
Use this for the lab? Or?
You'll have this in, not this week's lab, but after the break, or when you do JDBC. Okay. Now I need to make a connection. Connection, con, right? I could write connection. That's long. I could write C. That's too short. That's just right. Goldilocks it. Pull this in. Java.sql is what you want. Everything that we're going to be working with in the JDBC library is in Java.sql. Right? If you find yourself importing anything else, it's probably wrong. Right? Okay. Then I'm going to make a connection is equal to driver manager. Right? Driver manager. Driver, remember, that's the thing that we just installed right here, this jar. It is a driver that connects to a specific MySQL database. And we're going to ask it, please give me a connection. Get connection based on the URL, the username, and the password. Okay. Now, it's going to immediately complain about this, because if anything goes wrong, for example, a bad password, then an SQL exception will occur. And what do we do with these this is a checked exception. That's because JDBC dates back to Java 2, when they still thought that checked exceptions were a good idea. And so they just threw them out everywhere. Everything that you do in the JDBC API throws an SQL exception. How do you deal with it? Throw new runtime exception E. Let it be fatal. How can you recover from a bad password? you set the password up, right? You've got a misconfiguration or you've got something wrong, right? So there's no reasonable recovery from that. If you want to, system.error.println could not get connection. I only put that here because we're going to come back and fix this. The standard error, the standard output are not something that you want to be echoing anything to. If you actually want to, have a log of your application's activities, use a logging system. And I'm going to show you how to use log4j later on, because it is worth bonus and therefore required here. But I'll leave it as is for now. Okay. Now I've got my connection. Now I can do whatever I want with it. So, to prepare your query. So I'll have a string query. If I want to get a publisher, what would my query look like? Not this. Where's my SQL Workbench? There we go. All right, use cvirk and show tables. Make sure that it's installed. Yes, it is. So there's the actor stuff that we were doing with, that we were playing with. Here's the video game database. All right. How do I pull out all of the publishers? Select star from publisher. Right. There they are. But I only want a particular publisher based on its ID. So where publisher ID is equal to, let's go with LucasArts for now, 1. Right. And when I execute that, I get exactly the one record I want. Right. What would that look like over here in my query? Okay. Don't go to the next line. Thank you. Right. There. Except that, is that going to work for any type of any publisher? No. Don't hard code. You can hard code stuff if you want, but don't do it. All right. So how do I go about parameterizing this and making it a parameter that I can set equal to this thing up here? I could make a concatenation. Yeah, do publisher ID. Never do that. Ever, ever, ever. You are opening yourself up to an SQL injection attack, which is the most common way of attacking websites. It still works to this day because people do not sanitize their SQL. I don't know how to do this, so question mark. That's how you do it. It was a question mark, right? That question mark will be replaced with the proper value once we prepare it. So I need a prepared statement, right? PS. And I'm going to, again, put into a try catch here. So cut, paste. I need to bring this in, though. Import this. There we go. And my connection is now responsible for preparing the statement, prepared statement of the query. Okay? And I need to capture it because it returns a prepared statement. Right? Now, the prepared statement just says, okay, I'm prepared to change this parameter into an actual variable. What we have to do now is explicitly do that. ps.setInt. Right? And to do that, I will say publisher ID. That's the publisher ID I was given right here. Right? Okay? I started at 1. If there were multiple parameters, and all parameters are with a question mark, if there were 3 parameters, it would be 1, 2, 3. So it's not 0 indexing, it's 1 indexing. We will look at an example maybe later on. But I just have to set that 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and get the result set. Execute your query. So ps.execute query. What it says in the box, right? And this returns what's called a, well, here, let's hover over it and find out what it is. A result set. Call it RS, right? And capture that return value there. Now the result set is something that looks exactly like this over here. Let me go ahead and select from all publishers. And there we go. So if I were selecting all the publishers without that where clause, I would get back something that looks like this, 13 publishers. Now we have what's called a cursor in this. So I only have 5 fingers, so I'll say that, suppose that there are only 4 records. Now initially that result set is pointing before the first record. I want to advance this to the first record. And it's going to tell me, yes, this is a valid record. Go to the next record, next record, next record. True, true, true. These are all valid records. And when I go next again, it's going to go past the last result and tell me false. You went through all the records. That's how you iterate through a result set. Right? It's a really old school way of doing it because JDBC is old. Right? So all I have to do is set up a while loop. While rs.next, right? While it has a valid record to process, process the current record. ... Right? When there are no more records to process, this while loop terminates because this returns false. That's why I'm using it in the while loop here. It both advances the cursor to the next record, but then it also returns true. It's pointing to a current record. True, 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 and then finally false when it gets past however many records you have. Right? If you wanted to do something up front of, well, okay, tell me how many records there are, and then I'll do a for loop instead, that's 2 queries, right? That's a count query. Just to get the size, and then yet another query and another loop. Keep it simple. Just do one. Right? So process the current of the record. Okay. To do that, rs.get. Now, I want to get one of these columns here. Publisher ID. I already have that though, right? So I'm not even going to bother with that. I want the name. Right? I want to get that as a string. Right? And the column that I want to get is name, and that returns a string. I'll call it publisher name is equal to that. Okay. There. I've got the name. I've got the ID. I can create a new publisher. P is equal to new publisher. Publisher ID and name. There we go. In fact, I could just not name, but publisher name. Let's go over to the publisher and see that I've already got a constructor here that takes the ID and the name. I've also got the toString and the getters and stuff like that, boilerplate kind of stuff. All right, so come back over here. I could return that publisher immediately, right? And that'll break out of the while loop. That'll get back and that'll do everything, right? What are you complaining about? Import. There we go. But what have I failed to do here? What was this? What was the step-by-step process here? Close it, right? Let's find out what happens when I fail to close. Okay. So let's come down here to main and publisher p is equal to, what did I call that function? Get publisher by ID. I should have known that. And we'll get LucasArts, which was 1, right? And then system.out.println 1. Right? Now this is going to go by so quick. What's wrong? All right, return null. There.
You're just gonna print 1, or are you gonna print
Oh.
the publisher?
Thank you. 1. There we go. LucasArts, and I'm printing their ID in parentheses here. Okay. That's going to go by so quick that my program will end, and the resources will probably be cleaned up for me. Right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make it sleep. Thread.sleep. I'm going to make it sleep for 10 seconds here, which is 10,000 milliseconds. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to surround this in a try-catch as well. Right. There we go. I'll run it, and we'll see. Okay, it's going to run for 10 seconds here. Eventually, it will stop. But it's already printed. It's already processed the results. I'm done. Right? But I'm keeping this connection open intentionally for another 10 seconds. Okay? Now, it's been terminated. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to show you show process list. When I execute this, you'll see all of the connections that I have to the current database. One of them is MySQL Workbench, just keeping a connection alive in the background. One of them is me showing the process list itself. So show me all the processes, including the process asking about the processes, right? And so there are always going to be 2 here. Let me go ahead and run this, and we'll see that connection will stay open here. There it is. Now I've got 3, and it's sleeping. It's slept for 3 seconds here. Right? It's slept for 9 seconds, and now it's been terminated by now. Yes, it has. And now it should be gone. Right? Well, yeah, this is slow as hell. There we go. Now it's gone. Right? Now imagine if you did this as a matter of course, right? It'd be like a memory leak. You open up, you grab a bunch of memory and then you never give it back. Eventually you're going to grind to a halt. In fact, I'll show you what happens when you grind to a halt. I never, or for int I equals 0, I is less than 100, I plus plus. I never close any of those connections, right? And once I hit my limit, that's it. It kills all my connections. Why? Because I hit the max user connections, which I think is about 30, right? In fact, we can go up to 28 here, and this probably won't happen. There. Why 28? Because I want to show the process list over here and show you that there are 30 connections sitting here open and ready to go. I couldn't do all 30 because I need one for MySQL Workbench and I need one to actually show the process list, right? But if I did one more, it would be rejected and I wouldn't be able to do anything. Now there's an automatic timeout of about 5 minutes here. It looks like it's timed out already, that 10 seconds. And so if I show this again, probably we're back down to 2. Great. But if you get yourself into trouble where you're executing or you got yourself caught in an infinite loop or something like that, you might have to sit there for 5 minutes, twiddling your thumbs until the server destroys all your connections for you for lack of doing anything. So always close your resources. Right? So for close your resources. ... And instead of returning P, I don't want to do that. I want to come down here and close all those resources. So again, once more, in a try catch, and this one, something went wrong. I don't know. Could not get data, right? For some reason. Could not clean up, close connection. Right? There we go. All right, so what kind of resources do I have open? Well, I opened up a connection. That connection opened up a prepared statement. That prepared statement opened up a result set. Right? So if I create A and then A creates B, B creates C, what order should I destroy them in? The opposite way. So result set, rs.close, ps.close, con.close. And if you want to be ultra careful, you can wrap these in if conditions. If rs is not equal to null, or null, and it is not already closed. It is closed. If it's not already closed, then close it. You can get as complicated as you want here. Unfortunately, close, and then you can catch it, and if something happened, you can try to close it again. Unfortunately, that throws yet another exception, and then now you're just in nesting hell, right? Where you have to nest all of these things, right?
Is there a try with resources you could do on that stuff?
You can. Unfortunately, the syntax of try with resources gives you one resource, right? That's why it works with a file, a scanner. You open up a scanner, you close the scanner. There's one thing. Here, there are 3 things, right? And there's no guarantee. Now, a good driver will say that if you close the connection, it'll go through and close everything for you. But there's no guarantee on that. Right? In fact, older versions of the connector J didn't do it. I think the newer versions do that, but it's not well documented and it's not a guarantee. Right? Yeah?
Question about, was there a bonus for last assignment?
For early test cases and for printing them out in order, right?
Because I didn't see the printing out in order. Is it on the handle?
It's in the rubric.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I probably should.
Yep. All right. So, and then I return P here. There we go. And you're complaining because we initialized it to, we didn't initialize it, so I'll initialize that to null. So what if there is no record? Let me go ahead and get rid of this stuff. I've demonstrated why you do this, and now let's not do it. Or why you don't do that. I don't think that there's any publisher with ID 100. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. What's going to happen? Null. Is that what we want to happen? Sure, right? Yeah. Or if we didn't want that to happen, we could say if P is still null at this point, then we could throw our own runtime exception. No such publisher with ID equal to, and then publisher ID. Right? We could throw an exception. We could be quiet about it, right? We could throw new, sorry. Right? So we could just simply return null. That's a design decision that's left up to you. Okay. All right. Now let's come back up here to this while loop here. If I'm querying it by the primary key, does a while loop really make sense? Should there ever be somebody with publisher ID? Should there be two publishers with publisher ID 1? That sounds like an error to me, right? So let me go ahead and reformulate this. I'm going to make this into an if statement, right? Now, if there is one record, it successfully does it. If there's no records, it closes its resources and returns, or either throws the exception or returns the null value. I'll go ahead and get rid of this for now. Right? So there we go, and 100. Same behavior, but it makes a lot more sense as far as the code goes here. Now, what if, for some weird reason, there were two people or two publishers with the same ID? We can take care of that kind of validation as well. If we have one record, then we do it. If there are no records, then we move on. If rs.next, there's more than one record, right? Then something went wrong, and we can throw a new runtime exception. Multiple publishers with ID equal to, and then plus publisher ID. Right? Now, arguably, this is not necessary, because if you have a well-designed database with primary key uniqueness, right, enforced, that will never ever happen, right? 1. But it provides yet an extra level of data integrity if you want. Right? That's up to you. Okay. That looks like a good function. What would it look like if we did it by name instead? Copy. Paste. Right. And let's start from the top. Any changes here? Nope. Maybe there's an opportunity to create a connection factory by putting this into another class that's responsible for manufacturing connections for us. Right? Get connection, get connection, get connection. And there's only one place where you store the username and the password instead of 50 different places. Something to think about. Select everything from publisher where name is equal to this. And instead of setting an integer, we set a string to the publisher name. Now, we don't have a publisher name yet here for a second. But I'm going to go ahead and pull, instead of the publisher name, publisher ID instead. Because that's the other thing that I want. Right? If I have the name and the ID, I'm done. I don't need anything else. Right? And then here's publisher ID. Now, before we go on, should I be pulling both of those fields if I'm only going to use one? Nope, I'm needlessly shoving stuff over the wire. So I just want the publisher ID. Right? I don't want the publisher ID and the name. Right? If I'm just going to ultimately ignore it at the endpoint. So get in, and this is an int. There we go. Publisher ID. Now, what about publisher name here? Now, well, wait a second. Here I still have my if statement. Is it an error condition if there are two LucasArts? I don't know. Maybe not. Certainly not with respect to the way that we designed the database. Right? We can have multiple publishers with the same name in there. So maybe we don't want an if statement. Or maybe we do. I don't know. Right? That's you got to go back to the drawing board. What do we want in our design? What rules do we want? I'll go ahead and keep it like this, though. But I won't consider it an error condition if there's more than one. I'll just get the first one. Screw it. That's good enough. Right? Close my resources and return my publisher. Okay. Now, how do we get that name when the input is a publisher itself? This is where you create a dummy key. Right? So a publisher P is equal to new publisher, an ID of null, maybe, and a name of Atari. Is Atari in there? Yes, there it is. 9. Remember that for me, please. All right, so let's take a look at publisher here. That's an argument here that now that there's a connection to this database, right? Maybe I want to make things have the ability to be null in my Java code. Right? If I do that, then I can set something to null because I don't know what it is. In fact, I have another argument here for making another constructor because I don't want to have to explicitly pass in null. So let's go ahead and create a new constructor using fields, but just the name. Generate that. And now over here, I don't, here, I'm going to have to say this null and name. There we go. That's the way to do it. Right? There we go. And now I can create a publisher Atari, and I only have to provide the name. Right? If it's cleaner to have more constructors, then do so. If you want a copy constructor, do so. Right? If you want a copy constructor that takes something else along with it so that it can create a semi-copy, do so. Right?
Could you just use like initialize it to -1 instead of null?
You could do that as a flag value, but then you're trusting that the database does not assign signed integers for their IDs. Another solution is to allow the primary key to be null and then have that one record that's null as a special flag record. Right? There are lots of solutions. This is probably the cleanest though. Right? Okay. Go back to my data loading. All right, and then let's print that out. Print out Atari. See if it works yet. Atari, there we go. It's not going to work because it doesn't compile. We're given publisher P, not the result. There we go. And we're going to want to return the result, not the publisher that we're given. And now, what do we do about publisher name? The publisher that we're given dot get name. And then we'll just copy that over. Or have a copy constructor. I wouldn't do a copy constructor here because there are only 2 variables. But if I had, say, an option that had a dozen variables, I don't want to have to rewrite. And so you damn right I'm going to have some sort of a copy constructor. Right. Run this again, Atari. And it was null. Uh-oh. Publisher ID. Why are you null? What am I?
Like an integer option?
Oh, duh. I'm resetting the parameter variable. It should be result. There we go. There. No, still not. If where name is equal to get name, execute that, result, publisher ID, p.getName, publisher ID is right there, and then return the results. Uh-oh. Got a bug somewhere. Anybody see it?
Can you pass a primitive into the integer?
Yeah, you can. I mean, that's even safer. Get int, publisher ID. Select everything from that. p.getName, publisher ID. Get name. Result. I'm not seeing it. Is anybody else? Maybe, how about you online? You're on a 10-second delay, so no, you're not going to see it. Or you we'll have our answer 10 seconds from now. Oh. Am I calling the function? Duh. I should call this Atari key. There we go. And publisher Atari is equal to that, and then get the Atari key. There we go. There. Now it'll be 9. All right. What would it look like if I got all the publishers? Public, static, a
List.
list or a set, right? Doesn't matter, right? Which one do you want?
List.
List, okay. A list of publishers. Right? Get all publishers. Right? Again, copy paste. Do you see a familiar pattern here of maybe we can improve this a little bit, right? At least with a connection factory. Right? And so a list of publishers result equals new array list. Same connection, but a different query. Select publisher ID and name from publisher, and then no where clause at all, because I want all of the results. Right? Nothing to set here, but you still prepare your statement. There are unprepared statements. You should never use them because you get into the habit of using them, and then you're opening yourself up to SQL injection attacks. Yeah.
When it says prepare a statement, does it mean like encrypted?
Not encrypted, but for example, like if you set a string and you had like a quote in it or a double quote, that needs to be escaped, right? Now imagine that if it wasn't escaped, and you put in SQL code instead of the publisher's name. Now you can you're injecting SQL code into the query that's being processed on the server. That's how injection attacks work. Right? We can take a look really quick. Bobby tables. That's an XKCD. Okay. XKCD. Right. Little Bobby tables. I don't want an explanation. I'll give you an explanation. There, exploits of them on. All right, there we go. This is your son's school. We're having some trouble, computer trouble. Oh dear, did he break something? Did you really name your son Robert? And then we end the SQL query that pulled out the data. Drop table students, right? Oh yes, little Bobby tables we call him, right? We've lost all the student records because they dropped they executed an unsanitized SQL query, and the database is gone. And I hope you've learned to sanitize your database inputs. Programming contests, every year you'll see at least one team that named themselves an SQL injection attack, just to see, to be funny and see if it works. Now, hopefully, the server is configured to not allow compound queries to begin with. That's the first line of defense. The second line of defense is only use prepared statements, period. I mean, why use 2 or 3 different things when you can just use one thing that works for everything? All right. So select everything from publisher, execute the query. But here now I will do a while statement. Why? Because I am pulling every single publisher. Process the current record, publisher ID, and name. String name equals rs.getString of the publisher, or name, I guess. You can use aliases if you want. In fact, let's go ahead and use an alias as publisher name. When I do that, and I pull the column name, I have to use the alias because I aliased it. Right? And I can use the name and the publisher ID here. When I've got that, what are you complaining about? Oh, it is, yes. So publisher, there's no result because I erased that variable. And then I add it to the list. Results. Result dot add p. It's a list now instead of a single publisher. Okay. Close your resources. Return your result. Let's play with it. For publisher p in the collection, get all publishers. Say what? Yeah.
Is it in results?
Publishers. There we go. Yeah. Well, that was the local variable. I could put that into another variable here. But I won't. System.out.println pub. There we go. Publisher. What are you complaining about now? I have to import the array list because apparently it's not standard. There we go. And there. LucasArts, Sony Entertainment, Atari, all the way down to Delphine Software. Looks exactly like it would from MySQL Workbench, but it's all programmatic now. Right? The only other function that I was going to do was get all games. In other words, get the entire data model here. Get all the games and their publishers and maybe platforms that they're on, because the way that I designed the game class over here was that it has a publisher. Oh no, it doesn't have, I thought I did that. Let's look at platform. No, I did not. All right, so let's do that. Private, final, list of platforms, right? Or platform, right? So systems, I'll call it systems, okay? And in fact, this is a good opportunity here to talk about something that is not database related, all right? Let's go, ignore the compiler error down here, first of all. Which is better, a list or an array list of platforms? Which is more generic? A list. Is there cause to actually have specifically an array list referring to it? No. If there is, then yeah, you need to use an array list. But otherwise, polymorphism, right? Subtype polymorphism. Keep it as generic as possible. We could go all the way to collection if you really wanted to. That might be going too far, I don't know, right? A list tells you that it's ordered and it can be sorted. If you just have a collection, you can't sort it, right? All right, then I will go ahead and say this dot systems is equal to, what if I put this in as a parameter, right? This dot systems is equal to systems that's been given, or systems, right? That's one design decision. And that's what we've seen, say, with people and emails. What does that force somebody to do? Make a list and then give it off to someone else. Right? That's called a leaky abstraction, right? This game, in order to create a game, I have to know that the game is storing its platforms as a list. In order to create a person, I have to know that you are storing your emails as a list. Don't force somebody to rely on your internal representation. Give them a different way of doing this. Yeah, go ahead.
So if we want to sort it and we make it a collection, don't we have to like typecast it into a list?
It has to be, that would be an unsafe contravariance, right? Taking a super type and forcing it to become a subtype. Not all collections are lists. Sets cannot be sorted, but sets are collections. So you can't force an ostrich to become a robin. All right. Here I will do array list. But now instead of forcing somebody and leaking my abstraction out to the world and telling you, you need to represent this as a list, I will give them the ability to simply just public void add a platform. Now arguably, platform P, that makes this a, oops, this dot systems dot add, there we go. Arguably that makes this an immutable object because somebody can change the contents of the list over here, right? You know, can't have, nothing's perfect, right? It's a design decision, and there are advantages one way, there are disadvantages the other way, and then vice versa.
So the final keyword doesn't really do anything?
The final keyword makes it so that you can't change the list. You can add to it and subtract from it, but I couldn't, for example, say over here in get title, this dot systems is equal to new linked list, right? Because that would be reassigning the variable. Right? So I can't change the title. This dot title is equal to foo because it's final. I can't create a new list, but the list itself is mutable. Now, if you really wanted to go a whole hog here and require them to do that list, you could have, I think it's collections dot immutable list. Nope. List dot lists dot nope. Immutable lists. Nope. Collections dot unmodifiable. There. Unmodifiable list. Right? Now, this has the same interface. So it has getters and add and stuff like that. The only difference is if you try to call add, it throws an exception at you instead of adding the element. Right? But Yeah, don't do that. Here you probably want it to be mutable. Right? And there. No leaky abstraction. It's much more flexible because you're not forced to have the entire list up front. Think about back to your first assignment, right? Where you had to process the entire CSV file. Would you have the entire platform list up front? Not unless you process it once, process it twice, process it thrice, right? This way, you have to process the games once, then the platforms, and you can add platforms as you go, right? Or you can process all of the assets, and then one by one assets in the accounts list. You don't have to create a list of assets for an account. You can just add it as you go along. Right? Okay? Now back to over here. Ideas on how to do this? Get all. I guess we're all get all the games now. List of game results. Result is equal to new array list. Return that result. Okay. So ultimately, what am I going to have to do? I'm going to have to get all the games and join it over here to the publishers. Let's see what that would look like if I did it just in SQL. Right? So select everything from game G, join publisher P on G dot game publisher ID is equal to P dot publisher ID. I'm getting all of them. Now imagine sending this over the wire, right? Publisher ID is here twice for every single record. Right? You're sending 4 bytes, 4 bytes, 4 bytes, 4 bytes, plus any other wrapping metadata around that, that query. You are sending the game ID, which you do want probably, but you're also sending Rockstar Games, Rockstar Games, Rockstar Games, Rockstar Games every single time. Right? That wastes a lot of bandwidth. Not a big deal, there are only 20 records, but if you were doing this in a real application with thousands or millions of records, you're wasting bandwidth, right? And what is the number one bottleneck on computing, even to this day? Bandwidth. What is the cheapest way of getting a piece of data from here to New York? Does anybody know? Put it on a hard drive and drive it there, right? Even with gas prices, it's still the cheapest, fastest way, because network is still not fast enough. Right? You can put a whole bunch of hard drives in on a load up a whole bunch of hard drives, and then take one truck to carry all this massive data off to another physical location, and in a fraction of the time that you could send all of that unique data over the wire. Right? That is how slow it is. So, do not abuse your bandwidth. Right? That's the takeaway there. Right? Even with gas prices as they are, it's still the fastest, cheapest way. Right? That actually came up in a Google interview once that I had. I think that the question was, these are thought questions. They just ask you these questions to see your thought process. They're not actually looking for the correct answer. And so they said, you have like a 100 gigabyte file that needs to be distributed to 20 locations. How do you do it best? I go, all right, well, one way you could set up a torrent, and then you're sending it all throughout the network, and each piece is being served instead of just one server to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 20 locations. You do it in parallel using a torrent. You'd set up a torrent. He goes, oh, okay, good. Is there any other way? I go, well, buy 20 hard drives, put it on the hard drive, and then mail it. And that would that's probably going to be the quickest way. Oh, okay, yeah. Right? They're just asking you for that thought process.
What about like a video game like 100 bytes? Is it better?
100 what?
Like 100 gigabytes?
100. That's not. I mean, that's not really that much anymore. But I mean, if you had terabytes of information or something like that. I mean, for the same reason that tape backups are still byte for byte the cheapest way of storing stuff long term, right? Solid state still nowhere near the cheapness of that or the density of that, right? I don't think that we use tape backups anymore, but I'm sure that there's somebody out there that's still using tape backups.
Like they're talking about how like banks use like super old
I'm sure, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, if you want, auditing regulations affect everyone. For example, when we had our first child, of course, they measure, EKG output, and it was just, it was just a cool kind of, like graph or whatever. I said, "Oh, hey, that's cool. Can I have that when we're done?" She goes, "Nope." I go, "What?" She goes, "Nope. These records are official records, and they're sent off to long-term storage until, for 10, 20 years or something. They'll send them to some salt mine for long-term storage because they have to keep those records for legal reasons." And nope, you can't have. I can't have my EKG output. Come on, that's kind of a cool souvenir. Nope, it's not a souvenir as far as the lawyers are concerned. So yeah, auditing regulations, OSHA, not OSHA, but Sarbanes-Oxley and a bunch of others. If you're in an organization of a certain size, you have to keep records of some sort. All right. We don't have enough time to do it, but what would it look like? Or what's one way of doing this? Ultimately, I'm going to have the game and the publisher. Right? And I probably want the platforms. So query 1, pull out all the game information. Query 2, pull out the publisher. Well, I've got the publisher ID. Guess what? I've got a function that does that for me. Get publisher by ID. So do I need to join? Nope. Right? I don't need to pull out duplicate data. I'll just call that other function. Right? Now, arguably, if you're doing this many, many, many times, it would probably be better to join. And if you only have a small number of records, then the duplicate data being sent over the wire is not worth the duplicated connections to the database. This is all an engineering question, right? What's the trade-off there? What's the trade-off in simplicity in your code? What about platforms? I would probably load up all the platforms, load up all the games, right? And then make a query to the availability for each game, find out what platform it's associated on, and then just pull those out of a list. Or maybe a map, right? What if I started this entire process by, say, creating a public static platform or a map of integers to platforms, get platforms, right? And I'll get all platforms. And I will map their ID to their object representation so that I don't have to query it more than once. Right? So we'll start there next time, and maybe I'll just complete it and then show you the results so that we can move on to the other part of JDBC, getting stuff into our database. Right? Questions?
Are
No
there
question.
good ways to iterate over maps and sets and stuff?
Sure. Import the map. How do you want to iterate over it? Result is equal to new hash map. All right, I don't have anything in it, return result, but I could. So one way would be to iterate over the keys and then get the values. That's what I would recommend. Suppose that you wanted to do it in an ordered manner though, right? What I would do is I would create a list of integers, right? Keys equals new array list of integers, result dot get or key set. There we go. Now I've got all the keys. I can say collection or key, collection dot sort. Because they're integers, it's naturally sortable. Keys, if they're, I don't know, strings, it's naturally sortable. If they're accounts, create a comparator, right? And then for integer key in keys, now this will go in order because they're sorted, right? I can get the value, which is result.get key, right? And this value is just a publisher, right? Publisher value, call them a publisher here. I've got their key, I've got their value. It's a platform, sorry. There we go. That's how I would do it. Another way of doing it is there's not a for each loop. I mean, this is an enhanced for loop is a for each loop, but you can go with a. I never do it this way. Result dot. Well, values. If you don't care about the keys, you just want to iterate over all the values. Now, this is not going to be sorted according to the keys, but you can go ahead and go with all platform p in this, and then system.out.println p, right? You can iterate over the values. Or the other way to do this is through key entry. Result.entry set. There we go. And it's because it's ugly. And it's so ugly that I will use the var keyword here, foo, in the result. So that's something new. Don't use it. I'm only using it here because I have no idea what the return value on this is. It's a set of entries on integers and platform. So entry on integer and platform. There we go. Import from the map. There you go. And now you've got foo.key, get key, and foo.get value. That's why, I mean, come on. That's so much cleaner than doing an entry set like this. Right? Now I'll explain the var.
It's just a generic type.
It's a generic type that the compiler has to be able to deduce. All right, so the compiler is able to look at this entry set, look at its return type, and say, okay, then I know what this var is. Right? If I have a generic var bar, right? It doesn't know what it is yet because I haven't set it. But if I say bar is equal to hello, all right, I have to do that at declaration, apparently. That's stupid. That's a string now, right? And so it ends up replacing this var with a string. It is a feature that was added in a more recent version of Java. It is a stupid feature. The only argument that they made for adding that feature in was, oh, it'll save you some typing. It saves you like 5 characters, right? And then it obfuscates what you're actually doing here, right? It was a stupid feature. I don't think that they should do it.
That's like a JavaScript feature.
It is, well, there it's a little bit different because it gets into the scoping. var will scope it to the local scope, so that if without var, you can still do it, but then it gets hoisted up to the global scope. And let is for closures. It'll make it local to the closure. So there it's absolutely put in var. But it's a little bit different there because it's a dynamic language and there's no types at all. Right? That's why you got to get CoffeeScript or TypeScript or something like that. I think CoffeeScript is dead. I'm not sure. Somebody can find that out for me online. All right, next time.